Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. If there's ever been a year for transformation and transformation of leadership, it is this year, 2024. So, today, to talk about how to effectively lead through extreme times of change and digital transformation is John Rossman, who's been on the show before. He's the author of a few books, including The Amazon Way, Amazon's 14 Leadership Principles, also Think Like Amazon. His new book is called Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper Digital Era. We're going to be talking about all things leadership in the digital world and some strategies that you can immediately start using and putting to work to make sure that you are winning in this hyper digital, extremely competitive and challenging time of uncertainty and extreme change. Please enjoy John Rossman. John, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I think we talked probably like 5 years ago, if you
Yep.
recall,
Blake, thanks
Amazon
for
Way.
thanks for having me, and it's good to be back on the podcast.
Your content has never been more relevant. Just having that expertise in digital, having the experience at Amazon, and you and I were just chatting that you had time at T-Mobile too. So you are right there, front row to some of the world's most competitive, digitally smart companies. Let's just talk about. I'd be interested to kick off by just hearing your thoughts on what's happening now and some of the things that your clients are asking you to speak on or consult about, the most pressing issues.
Well, so the new book is called Big Bet Leadership, and it's about the need and the techniques to be successful at non-incremental initiatives, strategies, concepts that you want to take forward. And what a lot of my clients, want to talk about, they're thinking about AI, they're thinking about how to take cost out of the business. And those two things are directly related. And right now, there's a lot of point solutions, smaller task orientation applications for AI being done. But the bigger game is really looking at the complete operating model of a company where all the value, where all the customer experience is defined, and zero-based designing it. Like, how do we absolutely focus on the best predictable, best executed customer experience and the best operating model to bring that to bear for the customers and having great business results at the same time. So that's what a lot of the conversation is about. But I always get to the technology's cool and the technology's difficult, but that is not the hard part of making these types of changes happen. And that's what we unpack in Big Bet Leadership.
All right, so let's peel back the layers. You mentioned operating model, John. What are people not getting about what needs to happen in the operating model to have all these innovations and customer-centric cultures to flourish?
Yeah, so the book is centered off of three critical habits that big bet legends like Jeff Bezos, John Ledger from T-Mobile, Elon Musk, Satya Nadella of Microsoft, what they do differently to become a systematic transformer. And we think that there's three critical things that they do differently. They create clarity, they maintain velocity, and they accelerate risk and value, deferring out big commitments. And so the operating model has to support those three critical habits that are different for these high potential, high risk initiatives that we call big bets. So things like decision making speed, things like understanding how to make those key decisions. We call them kill, pivot, continue, or confusion meetings, right? Which are the high stakes meetings that go on relative to these big bets. Things like the environment and how we staff these big bets have to be engineered specifically for these types of initiatives.
Mm-hmm. And when you say big bets, what does that look like? What does
Yeah,
that
so
mean?
they get called many things within an organization. It can be a growth strategy, it can be a market entry strategy, it can be a digital transformation, it can be a replatforming program, it can be an AI strategy. But what a big bet is it has these two traits. One, it has the potential for high impact in the business, and they have many risks, many unknown unknowns, and many dependencies upon others in order to do that, right? High ambition, lots of risks. Those are very different than your typical incremental, well understood, line of sight type of project that organizations do. We know that these things fail, have a significant failure rate, like anywhere from 70 to 90%. There was one study done that concluded only 8% of big projects complete on time, on budget, and only a half of 1% complete on time, on budget, and deliver the expected benefits that were needed, right? And so they fail a ton. But we know that only incremental moves will not differentiate you from the customer. They will not differentiate you from your competition. So you need to have bold moves in the business. Well, that's a tricky value proposition, right? On one hand, you're going to fail the vast majority of these. On the other hand, we're actually going to need to do more of these. And so the book is for senior leaders to help them be better. We call it being the shark at the table, like tilt the odds in your favor to be more successful. And the general ethos of the book is that you have to think big but bet small. The whole goal is to create true agility of understanding the true concept that you are trying to deliver, what the critical things that have to be true in order to deliver that. And that could be customer experience, it could be operating capability, it could be cost model or financial model related. Bring those things forward, test them before you make big commitments. That's the general mission of the book, is to help senior leaders do those things.
And then from a customer experience perspective, I mean, most of the people that watch this show, they watch for the customer experience learnings. So what are some of the big bets you have in the book, if you do, about executives making risks calculated, you call them incremental bets on customer experience?
Yeah. So we open the book with the story of John Ledger in 2012 when he announces to the world at a Consumer Electronics Show that, he is going to take on the big broken incumbents in the cellular industry. No contracts, no roaming fees, no data plans, right? This was a completely counter industry perspective. It was a very cozy industry, and he took them on. Over the next 8 years, he successfully executed eight branded uncarrier moves to create the T-Mobile that we know at this point. At that point, they were the fourth place carrier an irrelevant fourth place carrier in the US market. Today, they're the market innovator and the market leader. So that's an example of a differentiated customer value proposition, but it obviously impacted everything about their operating model, their cost structure, how they executed these. And so that's why it's a good story of rethinking. We reverse engineered Amazon's kind of start with the end in mind, start with the customer in mind, work backwards approach to be able to define for your customer what's their true pain point. Now, we call it the what sucks memo, which is different than like what do the customer care about or the customer pains. It's like what's their real concern, and it forces you to dig deeper into really having the empathy, the understanding, the deep insight into what does your customer truly want and what's unsatisfying for today, because we all know that in order to get your customer to adopt a new method or a new product or a new service, it has to be much better than just an incremental capability. And so, again, we use the Amazon writing techniques to help you explore the true customer need and then develop what's your hypothesis for the killer feature that does this. And then what are the supporting operating things that must be true in order to deliver the killer feature. That's the basis for creating the first of those three habits, which is create clarity. So many digital transformations that I've been around, you'll go, and I'll start just by interviewing 10 people involved on the initiative, and I'll ask them, what problem are we solving and what's the solution look like? And I not only will get different answers, I will get widely different answers relative to answering those two, to me, fundamentally basic questions. And it's because most companies just float along in this ambiguity of improving the customer experience or improving operations. And what you need to do in order to accomplish these hard things is you need to get to clarity first and then experiment and test on them.
Yeah, I think getting clarity is hard. John Ledger is a was a founder CEO, and often I find with the most innovative companies, they do feature founder CEOs that are brave enough and confident enough to take these risks. They're not worried about being misunderstood or fired. What advice do you have for leaders that don't have that luxury of the reputation of being founder CEO that still
Yeah,
want to take
and
these risks, but also they don't want their peers and the board to say like, oh, what are they doing? They're a wild card. We can't trust them.
yeah, and that's why this does have to be president, CEO led, because middle management can't get that job done that you're just talking about. The key is the ability to communicate. And so strategic communication about what's the real problem in our business? What are we trying to solve? What do we think the path is to experimenting on that and resisting the temptation for a Hail Mary, which is like, oh, we think this is the idea. And then they start committing big relative to that idea before they've truly proven it out, right? So the third critical habit is accelerate risk and value, deferring out big commitments until you've really taken the risk out of the big bet. Ironically, the name of the book is Big Bet Leadership. The big is the ambition. The big isn't the size of the bet. And so chapter 4 is actually called Think Big, Bet Small, which is built off of Amazon's leadership principle around thinking big. But the whole
Hmm.
concept is have this ambition, but truly recognize the critical risks of your ambition and figure out a way to test those early and cheaply so that you can actually have an experiment led approach to driving these transformations. All too often, and we tell several stories in the book about transformations that have a big ambition, but then they take 18 to 20 months to do some type of technology platform or billing system or something like that.
Yeah, that's
And
so
it's only
long.
after that that they start actually testing the value proposition to the customer acquisition costs, customer service. And what you need to do is you need to figure out a way to flip the script, test those things early and cheaply, deferring out the big
Mhm.
platform or other initiatives that have to be done after you've proven those things out.
So you mentioned Elon Musk, John. I've just finished the book by Walter Isaacson, the
Brilliant
650
book.
page book. Read the whole thing every night, would read a little bit. Anyway, Elon Musk, he's a polarizing figure. I'm a Tesla driver. I also have a Toyota. So I'm just interested, like, what you like about his approach and just what are some of the things that you talk about in the book about Elon Musk and his approach at Tesla?
Yeah, ditto on many of those things. If you noticed, do you remember this concept called Elon's algorithm from the book, right? And they mention delete, delete, delete 26 times in that book, right? So what he starts with is a bare metal, stripped down, zero-based design approach to everything because what he's trying to do is get to the minimalist and simplest and most cost effective approach to solving the problem, the value proposition that he's trying to do. All of his companies have fundamentally reinvented the cost structure of the industry that they're in. And so he uses
Yeah.
zero based design and delete, delete, delete to get to a target unit cost so that he can then compete differently than anybody else in his market. Interestingly enough, if anybody read Amazon's recent 2023 shareholder letter that was just released, guess what the two things are that Andy Jassy is talking about and featuring in his shareholder letter? He is talking about, on one hand, unit cost. So he was talking about how they reduce their unit cost for fulfillment by 45 cents last year, which was the first improvement that they've had since 2018. And he talked about not only did they improve the cost to serve, but on-time delivery, speed delivery, quality of service improved also. And then the other thing he's talking about is that they build things in primitives. Primitives are the basic building blocks of a capability. And Amazon thinks in terms of these primitives so that you can reuse them, so that ownership of the small Lego block can be distributed, very specific within the organization of who owns that Lego block. The whole concept is a concept my co-author Kevin McCaffrey calls highly aligned, loosely coupled organizations, right? You spend a lot of time up front getting alignment on exactly what is the thing we are going to do. We call that the big bet vector, the problem, the hypothesis for the future. But then you're able to better delegate it to these loosely coupled teams to execute. And that is, I think, the ideal model relative to get to in most enterprises on new initiatives, is to figure out how to gain high executive alignment, truly understand the problem we're trying to solve and the commitment it's going to take from everybody, but then have a dedicated team that is set to execute at speed against the testing that has to happen.
I was recently interviewing someone. He started talking about Clayton Christensen Anderson. Or, I'm sorry, he recently started talking about Clayton Christensen and the innovator's dilemma, and how it's so challenging when you're disrupting an industry or disrupting yourselves. Like it's really tough, because I'm sure if you're hungry for disruption, there will be losers in the company. There will be groups that are no longer relevant. And so, like, it's survival of the fittest almost. So sometimes disruption and innovation can work against certain people and their roles because they're no longer relevant. So how do you create that culture where people aren't afraid of the future of their roles, and they're not just trying to sit on their fiefdom?
Well, I'm going to lean on some of the things we've already talked about, which is kind of communication is key, right? Honest, direct communication. And let me give you an example. Oftentimes, what senior leaders will do when they're starting this type of journey is they'll say, well, we have to become more effective. Well, instead of that very vague concept of being more effective and everybody's making meaning of that, talk about that in specific terms. We have to get our costs from X to Y. We have to get our quality from Y to Z. We have to get our customer experience from A to B. Be very specific about the problem and what your target is, and then be clear about either we have a solution and we are implementing it, or we're experimenting relative to it. We got to see how this works out. Those are very big differences in the type of communication that helps teams actually be successful at that type of change management. So Amazon's famous for their future press release concept, right? Start with the end in mind, work backwards relative to it. There's a very good book on change and communication called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And they have this concept of the destination postcard. A destination postcard is very similar to a future press release because it talks about where we're going and why we're going, and being consistent about that story. It has to be in a story format. Stories are 22 times more memorable than simple facts or
Yeah.
figures.
Yeah.
Employees need to hear these stories time and time and time again. Your job is to become the chief repeating officer, the CRO. And if I think about all of Bezos' superpowers, the one that I don't think gets focused on very often is his strategic repetitive communication, right? Just his 1997 shareholder letter, which is still attached to every shareholder letter, is a message to the team at Amazon about what we believe in, how we will prioritize, what we think the future is, how we are going to be an optimist and create the future versus, being concerned about the natural disruption that you're talking about, both disruption in the industry, but also evolution of your own business. And I think that is the right attitude, which is recognizing we have to change in order to be competitive, do it proactively, do it optimistically, build skills and teams so that they can be successful in the transitions, but do not set the tone that we are holding on to the past just to hold on to the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, now going back to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos, I mean, he always felt no one really understood what they were trying to be. What about companies that are not digitally native or like lend themselves to like more of a software transformation like T-Mobile or Tesla or Microsoft? What about, let's say, a manufacturer or a bottling plant? I mean, what advice would you have for them on how to take more risks? And it sounds like it's a more digital bent. So what
Uh,
advice do you
uh,
have
uh,
for them?
um, yeah, it's the exact same advice. You've got to run a competitive, effective, durable business. To do that over the mid and long term, you have to continue to improve your value proposition to customers. You have to continue to create a competitive cost model and delivery model relative to that, because we know that competitive differentiation is short lived and it's getting shorter. So you always have to be building out the next horizon of capability. And whether that's the same customer and better service, or the same customer and new capabilities, or new customers and new capabilities, all of those scenarios are applicable for any type of company because you have to drive continuous improvement. And my belief is, and this gets to the subtitle of the book about the hyper digital era, is that if you think the past 25 years of this digital era has driven a lot of change, I don't think you've seen anything relative to what the next 25 years is going to portend. We have to make transformation a core competency for senior leadership. It's not today. And we know that for a fact because of all these failure statistics, because of all these companies that are disrupted. And so when I get asked about the failure statistics on major transformations, one of the things I point out is like those failure statistics are real and they're scary, right? Over 80% of all these fail. But those failure statistics don't measure the big bets that weren't taken. Every time you see a great company go to average or an average company go to distressed or irrelevant, well, that's a sign of a air of omission, right? A big bet that was needed and didn't happen. We are
Hmm.
going to have to get better at these transformations because it's not just a combination of technology, but between technology, the aging of our population and our workforce, the committed spend of our government forcing innovation to happen as a way to solve our GDP issues, we are going to be going into a vortex of dramatic change. And there are going to be more dramatic winners and dramatic losers in this next era. And so, I wrap up with the book with the final piece of advice being you need to be an active skeptic. Active
Hmm.
meaning you need to engage early, figure out how to experiment in your path, in your manner, relative to your next horizon capability, but be a skeptic. Prove it out before you go big relative to these things. And so being an active skeptic, I think, is the right mindset to adopt to be successful at these time and time and time again.
Hmm. Okay, I love that. And now I remember why I was asking you about the bottling too, because I know you spoke to the Coca-Cola bottling group, and is that right?
That's right. Yes, it was down in Buenos Aires. It was the bottling company and all of their LATAM partners. It was a fantastic event. First time I'd been to Buenos Aires, and
So
it was a
pretty, right?
super engagement. It was super fun.
Awesome. Well, let's close with just some fun get to know you rapid fire. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. All right. First question, John. What's the most important part of your morning routine?
uh, Cup of coffee and then
Simple.
walk the dog and then go work out. But I'm very fortunate in that my wife is a committed early morning athlete, and so I have just created a sixth sense around getting up at 4:30 and getting it done, and then the rest of the day you own and you master. So that is the habit here.
All right. What do you do to relax at the end of that hectic day?
Um, dinner with my family. That's always, the thing that I've always treasured, and what I always tried to do was, I think a family that more or less has dinner together is going to be a pretty great family, and that was always a top priority for me.
Can I just I'm going to add a question. How old are your kids?
My kids are 26 and 24, so we don't get the opportunity to have dinner with them all the time, but we do get together pretty regularly, and we have a great time.
Awesome. All right. What show are you currently streaming?
What a great question. So we have been going through Friends,
Oh,
and
okay.
I think I remember seeing the first couple of seasons, but there are 10 seasons of Friends, and they did like 25 episodes a season. I have never consistently laughed so much as I do rewatching Friends. So that's what we've been watching, and then I've also been watching the Franklin
Yeah.
show that's on Apple Plus that is very good.
Oh, cool. Okay, I have to check that out. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
Perfect. I mean, getting to do meaningful work that I love, but having control over the commitment so that I can have the other things in my life that I value, which is family, health, and the time to explore new topics. So that to me is perfect happiness.
All right, super. And what's your favorite type of vacation?
Hiking. We've been doing a lot of national parks. We were just in Yosemite a week ago, and so I love getting outdoors, true wilderness, and and putting in some exertion with some fresh air. And I think that is just nourishment for the soul and for the body.
And if you could have lunch with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
George Washington, actually. There's lots of people I could answer that, but he was an absolutely historic figure, and I'd be honored to have lunch with him, and I would have a bunch of questions, but I also would thank him for his service and what he contributed to the founding of this country.
Wonderful. Yes, my daughter dressed up as Benjamin Franklin actually for school recently. It's called Anyway, this is a whole anecdote, but she dressed up as Benjamin Franklin to talk about how
Yeah,
he grew up. She resented having to dress up as an older man, but she looked really cute in her wig and glasses. She's only
I'm
7.
sure, and some spectacles on maybe.
Yeah. And lastly, if you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
Optimistic. I
Perfect.
am optimistic about companies and their ability to compete. I'm optimistic about our country and our society, and I'm optimistic about the role that technology can play in creating better and more fair outcomes.
Well, we need that optimism right now. So thank you so much. And everybody, pick up a copy of John's book at Amazon or wherever books are sold. John, do you want to give us a shout out to your website?
Sure. So you can go to Big Bet Leadership. We have a ton of resources that go with the book to help you put it into action. JohnRossman.com is the other website.
All right. Well, it's been so nice talking with you. I loved your stories in our podcast. And I hope you'll come back next time and tell us more about all the great things you're working on. It's just been really great to see you.
Thanks, Blake.
Everybody, you've been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me on social media, including Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and more.